When I was born, my grandfather, what part of the process is, if you have family members that are U.S. citizens, that have family members that are not U.S. citizens, they can request for them to start their process to become permanent residents in the United States. And that's what my grandfather did. When I was born, he actually put in the paperwork to start that process. And he actually requested me and my dad to get in line, basically.
On today's episode, we'll be discussing the importance of who's in presidential office and how it affects so many different people. And today I'll be talking with my good friend, Hector Berlanga. I start off by asking him to share his journey of how he came from Mexico to the United States. And the video will begin with him explaining that process.
Becoming a permanent resident first, because that's the first step, and then becoming a U.S. citizen is very lengthy and difficult, confusing. So he started that when I was born, which I was very blessed that he did that, because I had no control over that. I mean, I had no say in it. They just had the wisdom, right, and to do that. So when I turned 10 or 11, I finally got my interview to basically present all my paperwork, and they asked all kinds of history, bills, criminal record. I mean, it's very lengthy, and I don't want to. We can get into the details as we go on if you want. But it's essentially, I got my interview. And with my dad, we drove to. Back then, the customs offices weren't everywhere like they are now. So we drove from Laredo, Texas to El Paso, which was like a 12-hour drive. And I remember, I think I was like 11 or so, and I just remember there being a long line and to get into the interview, and then just seeing families come out like weeping, because they were denied or they were missing paperwork, and then they have to start the process all over again. And again, at this point, I'm 10, 11 years old, so I have no concept of what's happening.
Right.
Looking back, I realized it took 10 years. Like, from the moment my grandfather put in the request, it took 10 years for us to even get the interview, it's just crazy. So after I got approved, I moved to South Texas and came to school here and just started living here with my dad.
So let's transition into like the parallels between how you view things and how maybe I view things. So do you ever look at someone like myself or others who grew up here or was born here and didn't have to go through that process, and how we complain about certain things? Does that frustrate you? Because even though that wasn't your testimony, I'm sure you have family members or loved ones who are maybe want to be in your position but couldn't because they didn't have that opportunity like your grandfather presented you. So do you ever get like a frustration at seeing other people complain about certain basic necessities, if that makes sense?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I feel even though I'm not a U.S. citizen yet, and part of the reason why, honestly, it's just been I didn't see the need for it. Now that I have kids, I started the process of the paperwork, and all it takes right now is just you pay a fee. I think it's like $1,000, and you pay to take the exam. You study the exam, and then you just pass, and I'm good to go. So I could have become a citizen, I think, since I was 18 years old. At that time, it was very expensive to do that process, so I just didn't. And again, I never saw and maybe this is ignorant of me, but I never saw like, hey, this is it's so much better if you do, you know what I mean? But now with kids now, and partially this administration, that we've been with since 2016, that's been kind of pressuring me to do it, honestly. But I try to not be I try to not have this arrogance about me in that I look at people that are in the United States. I do feel like you do have the right to complain about whatever situations or circumstances that you're living through, because you're here. And I honestly have never felt like I didn't have that. There is a lot of beauty in the United States. There are a lot of freedoms here that a lot of countries don't have. And so, and one of those freedoms is me feeling like I could complain too. You know what I mean? Yeah. But I do always have in the back of my mind, and I try to, when I have conversations with family members that are in the United States or friends, I would say it could be worse, and it really could be, because I know there are things that are worse in Mexico, and I still have family members there. My mom lives there, and so I try to keep that balance. But I don't feel like, man, you guys shouldn't be complaining about these things. I really don't. I think the United States is far ahead than a lot of countries, but I don't think it's I think it could be better. I think it can get better. And so people speaking up is actually a good thing.
Yeah. So kind of to backtrack, because you said that you're not yet a U.S. citizen, so you have all of the benefits and stuff for voting. So what about having kids made you consider taking that next step now? Because they have the right to vote and all that, right? So it doesn't affect them.
Sorry, what was that?
Like your kids have a right to vote and all that because they was born here, right?
Yeah. So my wife is a U.S. citizen, born and raised here,
right.
And our two girls were born here, so they're U.S. citizens. So honestly, the fear. So let me put it this way: up until 2016, I didn't have any fears of potentially being deported, because as a permanent resident, you don't. It's a permanent status. That's what it is. It's a permanent status. So there aren't any legal. I think there may be some like maybe criminal offenses I'd have to really commit, like murder, or there are certain things that maybe I'd have to do to potentially be deported. But in 2016, when all this rhetoric of the others and the borders and we got to keep people out, the wall started happening, there was a little bit of fear that started coming into me and my wife, honestly, Brittany, thinking maybe it could be as simple as just getting stopped for a traffic ticket, and who knows what executive order President Trump might pass. You know what I mean? And so that's really what started causing me to rethink this, and started putting pressure on me to start the process.
But I kind of want to talk about the parallels of the Hispanic community and the African American community. I think there's a lot of similarities when I think about, I guess the only difference will be we was involuntarily brought here where you guys voluntarily came here. But our experience while here, I think, is similar. Being that, slaves built this country, as far as laying the foundation for a lot of the things we benefit from today. And how Hispanics built this country, by, kind of coming here illegally. But a lot of the buildings and things you see, the houses that are built, is by the Hispanic community. And then it's just this idea of not being wanted, like regardless of what you contribute to America not wanting you and rejecting you. And so I kind of wanted to discuss that to see if I'm kind of off in that, or do you agree that there are similarities? And then also, like, how's your experiences as a Hispanic man in America? Like, do you deal with discrimination from the police? Do you deal with discrimination at work? Like, do you deal with those things, or is it not like that? Because you could definitely tell you're not white, but you're on the brighter side. But yeah, I could definitely tell you're not white. But so yeah, it's just kind of elaborate on those things?
Yeah, that's a loaded question.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I love it, man. Well, I love the concept. First of all, I'll just say this. I love the concept of the podcast. That is just your thoughts. It's a very freeing environment, right? Where you can just express and there's grace because, you know, we're all growing. And I think as long as we're attempting to get better and grow, you know, we're bound to make mistakes or say the wrong thing or not understand or be ignorant about things. But I think if you have an attitude of like wanting to know and be better, there's grace, right? So I love the idea of the podcast. But to answer your question, there are similarities for sure. For one, we are minorities in a country that is primarily in majority white. The distinction that you brought up is key. I mean, that's a big difference. It really is that, you know, Africans were brought here against their will, you know, as slaves, and then you know, and Latin people, Hispanics, whatever term is less offensive to whoever's listening. Honestly, at this point, I don't really know, but you know, I'll make this clear. So I'm from Mexico, but there are people here from Salvador, from Honduras, from Venezuela, from Brazil, from Chile, you know, from Spain. I mean, there are people here from all over, Guatemala, you know, so it's not just Mexicans, obviously, but all of us came here because we wanted a better life for our families. And so, but in some ways we have helped build this country very, 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 very cheaply, right? Whereas with Black people, you guys were building this country literally for free, which, if I make this point, man, it's one of the reasons why the United States is the best country in the world.
Absolutely.
Because they didn't have to pay for the labor that brought it to what it is now. If you think about it, countries that didn't practice slavery, they're not at the level because they had to pay for people to build their country. And so there's that I think people don't realize. But
and that explains the financial gap in families. You have some families that still, even though they're no longer slave owners, they're still benefiting from the fruit of that time. And so that's absolutely
a lot of the systems that were built alongside the bringing up of the country were built with the reality of that day in mind. So what I mean is, if Black people were slaves and white people weren't, the laws that were pushed out, the systems that were created with that reality in mind. Absolutely. And so a lot of those systems are still living and breathing today. Now, they've been maybe modified, altered some, but it's still systems that were created with that reality in mind then that are still living now. And so this is why there are, like you said, there are like big disparities between you know, the income inequality, the education inequality, the housing inequality. I mean, all these things are a reality. And I say Latin, Hispanics, other minorities are kind of riding those coattails as well, because we are minorities in the country. And so most of what was pushed out as laws was for the benefit of the majority. I think that's just a reality.